To the interesting part, I want to introduce myself and my research to give you all an idea of where I'm coming from. I'm an anthropologist. Some of you may know already that anthropology is the science or the study of people and cultures with an emphasis on long-term and in-depth research, what we call ethnography. My research background focused on anthropology of motherhood, medical anthropology, and a bit of a passion for parental rights after having my own kids in relation to paid parental leave and parental rights in the workforce in Australia. And more recently, I've focused my work on options available to infertile and gay couples in Australia. And this is where surrogacy comes in. Commercial surrogacy seems to be one of the only avenues into parenthood for many Australian gay and infertile families from what I've found so far, from the people that I've spoken to. My current work focuses on commercial surrogacy in India and the experiences of Australian families who've used commercial surrogacy in India as a means of becoming a parent. From an anthropological perspective, it's a difficult research project. As I mentioned, anthropology is all about the long-term and in-depth study. So in the past, this has meant anthropologists moving to Africa or South America and living in a village for a year or two, just hanging around, learning the language. So it's much more difficult with a project like this because the pictures that I get of your experiences are fragmented. So interviews in a hotel room, following blogs, emails, informal chats over lunch or coffee. So these are fragments. My aim was to gather up enough of these fragments from Australian families, Indian clinics and surrogates to gain a multifaceted picture of this transnational relationship. Right now I'm piecing it all together and writing a thesis. I've still got about a year to do that. So what I'm presenting today is a bit of an impression with some of the fragments and the themes that I think are important. So over a year ago I was trying to plan out how to do this research. And I realised that just speaking to families who've used surrogacy in India here was not enough, didn't give me the full picture, so I needed to be able to tell the full story, and that would mean spending time with all the people involved in the surrogacy arrangement. Luckily for me, my partner's adventurous, or he was, after 4 months of being badgered by me. He and I and 2 young kids moved to India, and we lived there for most of last year. Some of the families through surrogacy that I'd met in Australia before we moved put me in touch with the clinics that they'd used in India. So the first clinic was fantastic and happy to have me visit their clinic as often as I could, but they were in another city, so I had to fly there each time, which was a limitation. And the main clinic in the city I was working in were also eventually happy to have me visit a number of times. And toward the end of the stay, really right towards the end of our stay in India, another clinic also came into the picture because of a parent who was using an Australian parent who used that new clinic. So they were also part of this project. So before I get to these fragments, I want to tell you a little bit about the climate that surrounds surrogacy in India. And some of you will be aware of it, and I guess everybody will have different perspectives on it. And this is only really just a little bit, but so there isn't much research into commercial surrogacy in India at the moment. There are 3 ongoing projects that I know of, maybe there are more, and there are 3 completed projects that have published works that I know of. NGOs in India are actually producing quite a lot of work in the area, and there's some fairly extensive research going on. And I met as many of the academics and NGO representatives as I could while I was out there, and I've been in communication with them since I got back as well. But what I found was that their main aims were to sort of expose clinics and to liberate surrogates, so it's a kind of really different angle. And commercial surrogacy is considered, so it's actually by these NGOs considered to be very exploitative of the women being paid to do this work. So this is embedded in a larger field of feminism in India as well that's, I won't go into now, but that's where they're coming from. And obviously this perspective is here in Australia as well. We saw this with Linda Burney making public stances against the use of commercial surrogacy and hence the laws and everything in New South Wales. So only a handful of researchers have actually spent time with women working as surrogates in India, and of those who have voiced their opinion of surrogacy, the surrogates themselves have been heard the least. So it's an interesting contrast that on the one hand, so many have such strong opinions of commercial surrogacy in India, and yet so few have heard from the women at the centre of the debate. So in part, these women are silent because in some cases they're contractually obliged not to speak about their experiences after surrogacy. And on the other hand, not many researchers actually focus on the voice of the individual. So politics, philosophy, all of these areas don't normally focus on the individual. Many academics within academia or researching for NGOs are trained to speak around the subject.
What's NGO, sorry?
Non-government organisations.
Thank you, sorry.
And they're normally activists within NGOs, so it's a different climate what they come here. So I should emphasise that I'm not discounting any of the findings that these NGOs have put out there. But having at least met some of them, they're motivated, they're intelligent, dedicated people. But then methods and motivations and everything are very, very different to where I'm coming from, but obviously no less valid, and the areas they're working in are different to where I was working as well. Having said this, I wanted to draw on some of the contrasts that I found. So for example, there was a recent article in the Hindustan Times where there was a report from the Centre for Social Research, so that's one of the NGOs I'm talking about. They're based in Delhi, and they reported negative outcomes for women working as surrogates at the clinic in Gujarat. So the clinic in Gujarat is one of the first clinics to come up in India that allowed commercial surrogacy. So the chief researcher, his name is Dr. Ranjana Kumari, expressed concern that the women who worked as surrogates would be rejected by their families after surrogacy. So this was based on, I spoke to her and she said it was based on interviews conducted with the women who were working as surrogates at the time, with their families and also with the clinic. But from what I've come to understand, the clinics offering surrogacy in India vary hugely from one to another, so the Gujarat clinic would be a completely different case. And from state to state, on many levels in terms of practice, the market, adherence to the assisted reproductive technology bill that you had some of the clinic representatives talking about earlier. The findings of one research project in one state conducted in one clinic will just tell us about those things. And it can't be generalised, just like mine can't be generalised. These findings can only speak at the specific time and place. The clinics I've been working with sit at the higher end of accountability, ethical concerns and practices, and the recruitment of women as off-site donors, gestational carriers and all of that. So they're sort of at the higher end. So they wouldn't relate to this Gujarat study necessarily. I hope I've set up the context a little bit, and I'm sure many of you will know this already, so thanks for bearing with me while I felt like I had to set up the context a little bit. So over the 9 months that my family lived in India, I spoke to 12 surrogates and 2 caretakers at one clinic, and 7 surrogates and 1 caretaker at another clinic, and that's what I'm basing what I'm going to talk about today. The women working as surrogates I spoke with were from I've written here lower middle class or upper lower class. I think I was overcomplicating it. You could just say working class background. So they weren't wealthy, but they were able to provide for their own children. The women had been working in domestic fields, so maids, cooks. One of the ladies had been working as an embroiderer in a factory, and one of them was a pharmacist assistant. But a lot of them were also housewives, not doing any paid work, and their husbands had all been employed. And although some had taken over as primary carers of the children while the women were doing this surrogacy work. So this tells me, or tells us, that in the case of these 2 clinics, that the women working as surrogates were doing so not so much out of an act of desperation, as it often gets reported, but more as an opportunity to get ahead. All of the women I spoke with had plans that revolved around their families' well-being and betterment. Most planned to put the money they earned through surrogacy into their children's education, and either towards purchasing their own property or starting their own business. A few were interested in working as surrogates a second time, and at least one was interested in becoming a caretaker for the clinic that she was working with. So these are the ladies who look after the surrogates. Many of the women I spoke with perceived their work as surrogates to fit into their idea of being a good mother. This was because the money they earned through working as surrogates would go into their children's future, through education, a better home, and a more stable environment. Although it has been reported that commercial surrogacy in India is exploitative, I'd argue that we cannot generalise. I do believe that the regulation of the assisted reproductive technology bill in India is needed, like it needs to be implemented. It's been around since 2008. And I think the clinics that are representing, people representing the clinics here today would agree with that as well. It's what they were saying earlier. I think women working as surrogates should have a voice in debates around ethical practice and exploitation. So what follows is an extract from the ethnography I'm writing, which is my thesis. In this section, I ask a group of women working as surrogates what they think about the idea of surrogacy as exploitative and why they think people might see it that way. So I'm just giving you one snippet of some of my work. The room had 6 beds, one against each wall and 2 in the middle of the room pushed together. Through one door I could see curtained off areas, and every now and then a nurse would walk past with a trolley. The other door led off to a waiting room. It was the door I'd come through to visit this group of gestational surrogates. These ladies were staying at the clinic to be monitored, either for high blood pressure, high temperature, or because they'd just been through embryo transfer. The walls were pastel green with large fans attached on each wall, and they were whirring away, creating a breeze in the heat of the summer. The windows faced a fairly busy road, and the sounds of the busy traffic were audible. There were 7 women in the room as I walked in. They'd been chatting and resting. I noticed one of the women, Ekbel, was lying on her side, fanning herself. I've changed the names, by the way, it's not that relevant. She was fanning herself, and her belly was much bigger than the last time I'd seen her. Ekbel had high blood pressure and was staying in the clinic to be monitored. She fanned herself with a piece of paper and had a strained expression on her face. Is she okay? I asked Dr. Adesh, who is translating for me. Aap kaise hai? Excuse my Hindi for the Hindi speakers. Dr. Adesh asked, how are you? She's okay. She has a high BP and she needs to rest. I smile as she nods her head to the side in acknowledgement. It's okay to ask questions. Do you think she needs to rest? I asked Dr. Adesh. She asks Ekbel, who smiles and laughs. Adesh laughs in response. It's okay, Acha, good, please, sit. I lower myself to sit on a bed that's much lower than the others, and all the women start calling out to me, Nahi, Nahi, no. The bed collapses, and I quickly stand up again, a little flustered and embarrassed. The women's expression melt from concern to laughter when they see that I'm fine. I laugh too. Dr. Adesh brings a chair across the room next door. I show my list of questions to Dr. Adesh. She glances over them and says, anything you ask is fine. They're comfortable. And if they're not, they'll tell you. I read out the first question and look around the room at the women while the doctor asks in Marathi, what did you think when you first heard about surrogacy? The doctor passes my dictaphone around the room. The idea of the counselling technique of the talking stick comes to mind, so listen to the women answer. They tend to build on each other's responses for the most part, and at times all the women start to respond at once, each giving their opinion or joking about the question I'm asking itself. At first I was scared. I didn't really know what it would involve. After the doctor explained it to me in all the detail, then I understood and I was relaxed. The dictaphone is passed from hand to hand. Some of the women are shy or not so interested in giving a response at the beginning of the interview and just say, same, and the other women laugh. The dictaphone reaches the women on the beds in the middle of the room. Chanda hands the dictaphone straight to Banu and smiles at her teasingly. Come on, says Chanda, what's your answer? Banu looks over to me and says, it's a noble thing. Being able to give a baby to a couple who cannot have a baby is a good thing. It's not wrong. We're able to make money and to bring happiness. The other women agree. I move on to the next question. Why do you call surrogacy a noble act? When did you start to think of it that way? Banu is still holding the dictaphone as she answers first. When I first met the clients, they made me comfortable and special, and I saw a person who I didn't know before was so happy. When the first test came back positive and they were so happy, I felt more happy and like a beautiful person. Upco and you, Dr. Adesh asked Chanda. The first time I met my clients, they made me feel very special. They gave me gifts and for me and for my family, and at the time I understood the meaning of these parents, that I would be giving them a precious gift. I asked the women if they could describe the ideal mother. Davy, who's been quieter than some of the others up until now, answers. We all here are very good mothers because we're putting our children first, their education, their future. We're putting them first through doing this, so we are good mothers. All the women agree. Putting your children first makes you a good mother. And the ideal father, I ask. My husband is taking care of my children right now, just like I used to. I'm very happy because he's doing this. Maybe he's even doing it better than me. I think all fathers should be like my husband. I say to the nurse, the next question is sensitive. I don't know if I should ask this. What do you think? The doctor looks at the question and asks me, what does this mean? I try to explain. In Australia, some people say that it's wrong to use a surrogate in India because these women may be poorer, and they may feel like they should do it for the money because it might be their only option. I wanted to ask what they all think about this. She understands. Acha, acha, good, good. While she looks over the question again, yes, it's okay, they should be comfortable with this. Dr. Adesh asks the women. Davy responds first, and all the women nod in agreement at her response. Maybe there are certain people who are just not educated about this, about the process. They have to learn many things about this, the people involved, how it is done, and why also. If I had a lot of money in my hands, then I would be doing this for free, because I would feel guilty to take the money if I had a lot. I would be even more happy to be doing this for free. Two of the ladies, Banu and Chanda, sitting on the same bed as the recorder is being passed from one hand to the another. One of the ladies again takes the recording device and holds it up to her friend's mouth, as though she's interviewing her. All the ladies laugh. We were sure what we wanted to do. We don't have any second thoughts. All the women laugh as Banu continues to interview Chanda in Marathi. I do not understand what they're saying. Dr. Adesh laughs as well. And when I look at her hopefully, she says, this is just these ladies joking around. I don't know what they're saying. If only I spoke Marathi. I asked the women what their hopes are for the baby or babies that they're carrying, and all agree that they just want the child to be well cared for and to be with the child's parents. The main concerns are that if something were to happen to the parents, they worry about having to give the child to strangers. All those who had met the intending parents felt that the babies would be well cared for. This baby is like my baby, and I've left my babies to have this child. I do not want anything to happen to this baby. I want this baby to be healthy and delivered safely. I ended the interview at that point, and thanked all the women and the doctor for their time. It was important to the women working as surrogates to have a connection with the intending parents. Understanding the feelings of the intending parents and knowing that the child they were carrying will be going to loving parents was important to the women I spoke with. And through this connection and positive interaction with the intending parents, the women felt that what they were doing for another family was meaningful and special. So the connection is a component that makes the experience worthwhile. Although the payment is important compensation, the feeling that they're doing something good was equally important. So I hope this small fragment has been interesting and a little bit useful for everybody in the audience, and thanks for listening.
Any questions for Michaela? Yeah, thank you.
In your work, have you ventured far enough to see if there's any correlation between certain factors in a clinic, whether it's the amount of money they pay, the surrogate, etc., as a correlation for minimising exploitation of the woman?
Have I looked at how much the surrogates, if I understand the question properly, have I looked at how much they're paid compared that to
other factors in any of the clinics that you feel is a good correlation, inverse relationship with exploitation?
Okay, so no, I don't think, in the clinics I was working with, I didn't think that there was exploitation though, if that's what you're asking.
But more broadly across India,
I can only speak for what I saw, yeah. I can only speak for what I saw. Like I was saying, to set up the context, non-government organisations who fight for women's rights do feel like there is something that needs to be fought for, and I think that those are in the smaller rural clinics, but from what I saw in my experience, I didn't see exploitation. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Any other questions?
Can you name the clinic?
No, I can't. I had to go through a whole ethical process that was really, really long, but all universities have them, so I can't name anybody or the clinics.
Yes?
Michaela, do you feel that using the doctor as a translator compromised your data quality at all, in that they may have softened some of the responses?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually, the doctor was a translator, but then I had somebody else translate it afterwards, because sometimes, to be helpful, the doctor sometimes summarised what people were saying as well, because there was so much confusing talk, so it's been retranslated afterwards, yeah.
So the room affected their response as well.
Pardon?
Having the doctor in the room
could have
affected their response.
Yeah, you're right, it could have done, and it definitely. I have to say, in this instance, the example that I'm using here, the women were very relaxed with this doctor and joking around with her, and I didn't feel like they felt kind of intimidated by her. But that doesn't mean that's not a factor, right?
Gentleman in front row.
Can you sort of give us just a few minutes, some idea of what the nature of this exploitation is, and what sort of, are you going to do more work in this area over time? Or?
I do. I want to do another project after
Please
this
repeat
one.
the question.
I'll repeat the question. It was whether or not. Oh, could you say it again?
I'll start again. When you used to explain for us a little bit what either the real or perceived exploitation is in India of the surrogates, and secondly, what are you going to do further work on it, and what sort of work you're going to do in this area?
Okay, so is there the real and perceived exploitation, and then whether I'm doing more work in the area. So they're two different things. Okay, so it's quite complicated, but if you wanted to put it down to the basics, I would say that in the case of India, the reason that people think that commercial surrogacy is exploitation is because the women are poor, and money can therefore be an incentive and get in the way of an altruistic motive. And that's considered to be exploitative, and obviously it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's the basics of it. And in terms of research, further research, I think that, I really think that another larger project needs to be going on. There's a study going on in the UK at the moment. It's by an academic called Gombok, and she's doing a longitudinal study of families through surrogacy, which is informing policy there. And I think we need something like that over here, for sure. And I think it can't just be anthropology, I think we need a psychology element as well.
Michaela, can I just check, do Indian surrogates understand the term exploitation as Westerners do? Is it the same definition?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't... Pardon? Repeat the question. Do Indian women working as surrogates understand the term exploitation in the same way that we do? You'd have to ask, first of all, people who speak the language natively, which I don't. I only got sort of to skim some of the polite things that you can say and understand some very basic things. Obviously, if women have a background, or anybody has a background that's not at the same level of education as we do here, it's going to be a different perception of what exploitation is. And again, that can be really complicated as well. You can go into all these models, like these philosophical models of how growing up in a society that might be oppressive towards women might change the way that their expectations of themselves as well. So it's
but
really
the women
hard.
you talked to didn't feel like they were being used or abused by the system?
No, I would not say so, no. Sorry, I overcomplicate things sometimes.
It's just one more question.
Did you feel as though the women had a good understanding of the process, that they had the ability to understand what they were going through and what was ahead of them?
So did the surrogates did I feel like they were well informed, the surrogates were well informed of the process? Yes.
Fine, wrap that presentation up there. Michaela, thank you very much.